Hello, Veena. Welcome to the Rethinking Economics India Network again. I know you were a part of a previous panel, and it was wonderful to host you for that session. For this, the purpose of this conversation is to try to get expert insights on what we feel the future of economics should and probably would hold, especially for those at the margins of society as it is currently constructed. Um, and this session is an interview of sorts. It's a conversation. We'll try to keep it as that. And before we begin with the official procedure of questions, I would like to give a brief introduction to the interviewee today. Veena Palekar is currently the General Secretary of Dalit Arthik Adhikar Andolan, and she coordinates the national coalition of the SCP TSP legislation and is also the Executive Director of the South Asia Dalit Women's Economic Empowerment Program of the Asia Dalit Rights Forum. And she's been with the national campaign for the Dalit human rights for the last 7 years. And her thematic areas focus on Dalit economic rights with a special focus on Dalit women's economic rights. Um, and her professional career has spanned across various organizations, and she's been passionately working towards policy changes within central and state governments for the development of the Dalit and the Adivasi community. Thank you, Bina, for joining us today, and it's a pleasure to have you. Um, okay, so the first question that we have for
Thank
you
you.
um, is how has being a female activist been significant to you?
So I think that we all carry multiple identities, and the identity of me is, of course, a woman, a Dalit activist, and the intersectionality of both that. Uh, I also feel that being a woman and being in the space that I am is a very niche space, because in economics we don't have, or people talking about budgets and governance, we don't have many Dalit women in this space. So I
Mhm.
think that this has been extremely a very fulfilling journey for me in the last 11 to 12 years, where I have actually looked at, what is the policy, what are these spaces up, and also trying to see if we can open up these spaces for women from the marginalized communities. We must remember the context that we are in. We are in a historical context. The historical context is that, you know, over the years, most of the work that has been done on Dalit rights has been on violence and atrocities and access to justice, because that is the single most important thing for us.
Mhm.
Because every day we are facing injustices, every day we are facing, atrocities and violence, and therefore a large amount of work of the movement, as well as work of Dalit rights activists, has been on ensuring that, we fight legal cases, ensure that, caste-based discrimination doesn't happen,
Mhm.
atrocities, also firefighting a lot, because on a daily basis, according to the NCRB, I think about 45,000 cases registered every year under the SC/ST/POA Act. So a large amount of work was on that. Men, women were involved in that. But then, people, some activists within the Dalit movement thought that there has to be something beyond this. We need also good housing. We also need education. We also need, our children to be able to go abroad and study. So slowly there was a shift where some activists like Mr. Gandhi, who was the ex-principal secretary of the Tamil Nadu government, who's a Dalit activist, who felt that, they felt that it was important to work on these sub plans and to look at budgets.
Mhm.
Mr. Paul Devakar, these were some people who actually felt that, started talking about budgets, and then suddenly this space was occupied by men mostly, no? Suddenly this space, everybody, because when you're talking about budgets and when you're talking about governance issues, it's mostly by men, whether it's Dalit men or non-Dalit men. But then a few years back, when I started talking about this, there were very few women, or almost no women from the community especially. So for me, it was very difficult. I think we'll talk about it more. So as a woman, I think it's fantastic that we have a Dalit woman who is talking on these issues of governance and budgets, and it has given me a very special an agenda that is so critical and important to the community. Now we have many more women who are talking about it. So I think it was for me a terrain which I was entering that was dominated by the male bastion, and then to be able to enter into this field was rather difficult. I think as a course of our interview, I'll share some instances.
Thank you for that, Veena. You mentioned a lot, and I and I wish I could go into collateral questions from your response, but the first sort of question that comes up that gets prompted is you mentioned instances of violence and discrimination. Would you be willing to share some of them, either that you have personally experienced or that you have witnessed as a third party? Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up in a very protected environment in Pune, and in we on a campus that was very well protected, and but I was also fortunate enough to get access to education. I grew up in a family that believed and wanted education, and pushed us for education. And I think every Dalit family, if you see, one of the first things that they would say is education. It's not about building empires or getting something. There's just get your education, just somehow pass your 12, get your bachelor's, go on. So I think education was a very key thing. So personally, as growing up, I also was not aware of my own caste location. So the thing that I was very much aware was my color, that I was dark skin. That I was very made aware of, and probably it could have casteist tone to that. I'm sure where people were doing it. But there I couldn't, the discrimination I faced because of my color, because there were many more fairer, girls and boys in my class. And so there I knew that, although I was very good in my studies, when it came to like welcoming guests, when you're giving a shawl or a garland as a child, they would go and pick the fair looking girl, so that for them that is representative of a nice, cute looking girl, whereas we as dark skin didn't get those opportunities where you were at the front, to welcome guests or to do things. So despite being good in my studies, and despite being really good in extracurricular activities, I was not given those opportunities. So there. But other than that, I would like to bring out that discrimination runs across the board, based on caste. If you and so I'd like to just focus on education just as a single point agenda in this response to your question.
Mm-hmm.
We were following up a case of a young girl in Delhi who was a scholar, and she was doing her PhD, and she rented out an apartment. And while renting out the apartment, she did not, of course, reveal her caste, but her friends and her were once talking between themselves about, being Dalit and being caste, and her owner happened to come by, the owner of the house where she was renting. And when he came to know that she was Dalit, he actually beat her, saying that how come you have, stayed in my house without knowing that, without revealing your caste, and you being Dalit, please get out of here. And he actually beat her. And then we followed up that case for many years in the courts. The point is that somebody who has reached that level of education, somebody who has gone through her entire, schooling, must have faced discrimination, come to a point where she's doing her PhD. She's not some small, child. She's grown, she's understanding, she probably speaking English and speaking Hindi, whichever language that she was speaking with the owner. And even that didn't stop the owner. That means no matter how much you educate yourself, no matter how much you are able to climb the ladder, the tag of Dalit will not go. It'll
Yeah.
still be there. This is one incident at the higher education. At the level of the school education, in one of our case stories, where this young boy was sitting separately from the rest of the school students and eat during lunchtime. And when we went to Nas, he said, "No, I sit by myself and all." While probed further, he said that, "No, they don't sit with me because I'm Dalit." So from that incident to the incident of when somebody reaches that journey of, is filled with caste and caste based almost like atrocities, because they call you names, they don't want to sit with you. And many times when I ask students, just normal students in colleges, do you practice caste? Many of them say, no, 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 we don't practice caste. What's the thing of the past? We don't think about it. But actually, when you start asking them to look at the cliques that they belong and
Yeah.
who are their friends, who are they linking with, who are you dining with, they're all the same caste people, right? They're all
Yes.
from the same caste. So that itself, in a way, is that you're not able to deal with somebody who probably is not as articulate as you are, or probably doesn't dress like you have all the designer brands, or so we're also forming those cliques without, maybe unconsciously, also not consciously, but then it's still caste based, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think across the board, you can see that from the time a young Dalit boy or girl grows up, caste follows them through. Even if you become an IFS, an IAS officer, or you become a scholar, or still people look at you as a Dalit, and that is the sad part. But I just will narrate one personal story, and then I will stop the response to this. Uh, I remember at one meeting that I was in many years ago, I spoke, after I spoke, somebody got up and very irritated by the fact that, I was talking about the situation of Dalits and Adivasis being in, and they look at me and they ask me, um, um, you're saying all these things about Dalits and Adivasis, and that there's poverty. How come you, being a Dalit, can speak English so well and be able to articulate yourself so well? And I was actually, for a moment, I was shocked. I was trying to figure out, was she saying that because she expected me to be poor and not speak English, and or was she saying that out of the fact that, hey, it's great, you're able to access probably a good education, and you're here, and it's great to know that people like you are able to access. So I was so shocked at that time, and I didn't know how to respond to that question. So I always say that the picture in the mind of a non-Dalit, of a Dalit, is always that they have to be poor, their tattered clothes, they may not be able to speak English. And that's the picture in the mind that they carry. And that picture itself, is something that they use to then discriminate, then uh, oppress the Dalit and Adivasi community.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for that response. Having just finished my education, like my postgrad education as well, I've seen instances where people have been singled out and not been talked to, but never explicitly has it ever been talked about their caste. And
Yes.
yes, and a lot of reflections are going through my head right now. Yes, but thank you so much for that. Uh, you mentioned, and thank you for bringing up education in academic institutions of all kinds, because that's where the next question sort of meanders towards. Um, and since you focused a lot on economic rights as well, we wanted to ask you the prevalent mainstream that we have in economics in terms of both school of thought and methodology. Do you think this prevalent mainstream has had any impact on, number one, the curriculum that we teach in throughout the school sort of level, whether we begin from primary or even higher school, and secondly on the given and the different political institutions that we have in the country.
Yeah, so I think that mainstream is, I don't know. I remember when I started talking about economics and when I started talking about economic justice, and when I remember that when we used to sit at discussion round tables and talk, and people used to never even look at me. They were so scared to even look at me because they were like, I don't exist. Like she doesn't exist because I probably was one of the only few Dalit women who was sitting on those tables. They must be very used to Dalit men talking, but Dalit women talking about, so these were mainstream activists, men, women who've been, talking, who are quite popular. Everybody knows them, and it was almost invisible. It took me a few years to convince them that, boss, listen to what I'm saying. At least listen to what I'm saying. No, so somewhere I feel this mainstream economists and mainstream politics have somehow further invisibilized the voices of the marginalized, even today. To give you an example, this might be a little controversial for people who are hearing, but I have to say it anyways. That recently there were a group of feminists, started a feminist economic a group. They started a group, and in that group, they invited many feminists to be part of the working committee of that group.
Mm.
And it was very sad because I've been engaging with those same feminists for some time, on economics, on budgets, on governance.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to invite me for those, to be part, but they could have had other representation from, non-Dalit women, whether it be if Ruth Manorama is there, she's talking, Manjula is there, many other, senior activists are there. But there was no representation, neither from the minority nor from the Dalit women. And these are women I have been engaging with, and I was so shocked that you could form an economist, feminist economic group and unit without actually having representation from the Dalit or the, so somewhere the politics is still ingrained in casteist politics. You're still playing those same games that you have been playing unconsciously or consciously. I feel in this, sometimes it's now becoming conscious because, it's also about your privilege in those spaces, right? These are privileged spaces. NCDHR is one of the few organizations who invited to sit with the finance minister for the pre-budget consultation, The other Dalit organization is NACDOR, they invite. So these are the two organizations from the Dalit community who they call to sit at. So there is some credibility to the work that we are doing. This, in some ways, further, invisibilized by these other civil society organizations, and sometimes it's really sad. It's sad because if we are in this sector, in the social sector, we are in this because we believe in inclusivity, or at least I think we do that. And to be believing in that inclusive space should be expanding and broadening our horizon to ensure that we have representation. And that's why we are here fighting against, the policies of the government, or looking at how we can get more voices from the ground. And who are voices from the ground? It has to be people from the oppressed communities who are always left out of, there's an African saying which says that, I always say this because it's my favorite saying, they say that if you're not on the table, then you're part of the menu. And so we have to be at the table, we don't want to be part of the menu. And that's the fight that we are. And that is what mainstream economists and mainstream, the political spaces have to give. They have to give the space for the men and women to. And therefore, when I remember that when I started talking about this, even within the movement, many men were like, couldn't even look at me when I was talking, like they just like look here, look there. I was just like, what is happening? What is wrong with people, as a feminist also, and as a woman, it was so disheartening for me when I started my work in this field and talking about and getting into a space that was male dominated, that was, and then slowly, I think somewhere I had to push myself. I used to just push myself. Although at home I used to come and, cry and feel bad and all that, but there I had to put, whether I knew anything or didn't know anything, I had to say something. I had to put my foot there because I wanted them to see this face that is talking on, I'm not just an invisible face sitting there, I'm there because I have something to bring to the table and something to, talk about. And so I think that the mainstream has to, if they have to continue to, if the mainstream is continuing to, how do you say, define the politics of this country, then they have to ensure that it's inclusive. And to be able from, there has to be a push and a pull. We have to push our way through, and that's literally what we have been doing, for the last so many years. And there has to be some pull factor, that they also have to realize that, boss, you cannot continue to talk without having representation from these communities. Otherwise, what's the point of having an economic framework that is so kokla, how do you say, so empty, it's like without anything for the last man, woman, trans, standing in. So I think it's important. I think that kind of a space is important.
Okay, thank you. Now venturing into another space that you've also ventured into, academia. How do you think academic research and teaching and professors in general, undertaken by both professors and students, can contribute to increasing equity in our society and lessening this discrimination and the marginalization that you've been talking about?
Yeah, when Ambedkar, when people talk about Baba Sahib Ambedkar, they talk about him as being a social reformer. They talk about, the last they'll say slowly economist. But actually, he's an economist by his, he's of course a lawyer as well, but professionally, the RBI, everything it was his, brainchild. He looked at it. He provided the initial, thrust to get into this. So somewhere, calling. I know some of my colleagues who've been working in this space for many years still do not be considered when it comes to, because they think even civil society, when they talk about NCDHR, they say, or Dalit Arthik Adhikar Andolan, which is a unit specifically working on, they say no, they're working on caste-based discrimination. They're not willing to accept that we are also contributing to the political framework of this country. We're also looking at policy and advocacy. They don't want to consider that. So somewhere I feel in academics also, maybe that is a struggle for many of our younger, but also I feel like Thoraji, for example, has really created a space, a space where he can bring in those, whether anybody likes him or not, that's a different thing. People may not consider him, but he has brought in a significant amount of contribution to economics. He's brought in, some of his work is excellent, like his work on the non-discrimination, the report that he made on the discrimination cases and aims, and gave a set of suggestions. If you were able to follow the suggestions itself, we'll be able to curb discrimination a lot in many of these universities and colleges. So I think that academics is a very, very important field. I think it's great to see people like Thoraji, Vimal Thorat, she's also been very, very, we have Sukumarji, we have Vivek, Professor Vivek. So a lot of academicians who have created, who have pushed, and who are making significant changes in academia. And I think that is brilliant. Suraj Youngde, for that matter, he's been talking a lot on, he's an academician, he's a scholar, so he's also, so there are many people who are younger, like for example part of your collective itself, Aditi, Priya,
Yeah.
so younger people are also coming up from the community and who are challenging and who are saying, um, who are challenging the status quo. So I think we need, and I always think, people say, oh, if you have not experienced and if you're not, then you're not a Dalit, or if you're not from here, you're. No, I think everybody from the community has a role to play, you know, everybody. So the academics has a very large role to play to
Mhm.
ensure that, our voices are heard, the political, the the writings, like Thoraji has been writing a lot. So their writings are so important to get the message across. And that is important. Activists like us who are on the ground fighting, we're fighting legal cases. We are, looking at discrimination in education. Our teams on the ground, we're looking at, 10 states where students, we can ensure that more and more students apply for scholarships, and looking at one single big agenda of the scholarships to be able to reach the ground. Doing advocacy in the state level, national level, that bit is there. We have the young people on social media who are challenging, who are fighting, who are creating spaces for themselves and able to have a dialogue, which otherwise wouldn't have been possible for the younger people because mainstream media has always. So I feel somewhere, Yash, that these 3 or 4 different groups of people have to work together, to ensure that our community is, there is an upward mobility for our community. And it's so important, it's so critical, because these critical thinking spaces of academia are important and will continue to be very significant for both our growth as a community, but also to challenge the external. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And I have two, in fact, questions from this. One that I'm going to leave at the absolute end as a good end to this. But you mentioned also your work with central and state government structures and policymaking in general. Um, do you mind explaining a bit in detail as to what changes from the government's perspectives, at least, both in terms of their structures and their methods of working and policies as well, that are required immediately to sort of have a representative development of the marginalized communities and try to contribute to this movement?
Yeah. To respond to this question, what changes the government has to, I'll just give you an example of one of the big advocacy wins that we had as NCDHR. We do have 2 different coalitions that we are anchoring. One is a coalition on SCP-TSP legislation, and the other coalition is on the Prevention of Atrocities Act. And so we were fighting for amendments. You might be knowing of this for the last, I think, 5 or 6 years. And in 2014, there were 2 big agendas that we went for our advocacy campaign. One was the amendments to the POA Act. The second was the SCP-TSP legislation.
Mm-hmm.
So the SCP-TSP is a legislation this is Scheduled Caste Subplan and Tribal Subplan, is two very important vehicles for ensuring that development reaches the people. So proportionate to the population, a budget is allocated, and mostly it's not proportionate to the population, but that is what the policy or the guideline says.
Mm-hmm.
So so we went, we were out on the streets from 7 in the morning to like 12, 1 o'clock in the night advocating, because it was also the time for the next elections, 2014. So 2013, to early 14, we had this really extensive campaign. We met everybody from Sonia Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi, everybody. So even the opposition at that time, BJP, we met almost all the different political leaders. And I remember one of the key advisors to at that time, the government in power, told us that POA Act, it's okay. We can see. But SCP-TSP legislation, no. that will not come. Nobody will accept that.
Hmm.
So we had a huge argument. And this the argument was about what? What was their contention of not having it? Because it was it had a monetary implication.
Mhm.
And so I was just thinking in my mind. So because it has a monetary implication, you don't want to make that a legislation, but you're okay to just have a policy because it's okay just to put some numbers there and satisfy, okay, there is a plan. But the moment they want to get serious about it and give it legal backing, they didn't want to do it. And finally, Congress didn't accept it. The POA Act again was by an ordinance was passed, but then later it was supposed to be passed in the House, and Congress then did not win the elections. It went on to the BJP party and the NDA, and then we know the rest is history. They passed it in Parliament, and uh, NDA got the credit for it, I guess. But somewhere the fact that they are able to give have to give a monetary how do you say give allocate a certain amount for these plans. They didn't want to do it because they really didn't want to want money. So I think one of our first demands have always been and will always be that they have to legislate the scheduled caste subplan and tribal subplan. Now it's called welfare for scheduled castes and welfare for allocation for welfare of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Has to be legislated and allocate, the money has to be allocated. There has to be monitoring committees within every district to monitor the flow of these funds to ensure, because now what is happening in the last 10 years, we have been looking at these subplans. So much of money is going to be built, is diverted to build stadiums, to give Diwali sweets, for buying bullets, for building swimming pools. That has absolutely nothing to do with our people. So somewhere there has to be strict monitoring measures. I think if this one plan they're able to put in place and implement it, I guarantee you in the next 10 years, there will be a super change that we see. Because in this also comes the scholarships. There's a huge scholarship for our children. So scholarships can come. There's livelihood. Your money is allocated for livelihood. So just within this plan, there are so many schemes that, we've also given a list of schemes to the government to look at how we can have different schemes, much more innovative schemes, where children, more money is given for children to study abroad. Let's see if the government accepts those. But at least there is this one plan, according to me, has to be set to ensure that the development really reaches where it's supposed to reach. One thing about COVID that I'd like to say, without which I think it'll be unfair, that during COVID, we realized that there is no fallback mechanism. People have some land, people have houses, people have, some credit they can take from our people don't have anything. They don't have access to land. They don't. So one of our demands have been that there has to be, if it's universal social security system, it's fantastic. But if it's not universal, at least to ensure that the marginalized communities have a social security where they are able to fall back during, times like pandemic, which has to be included in the SCP-TSP, that's fine with us, or have a separate budget for that, but ensure that that is given so that also people are able to, able to fill some gap at least for the initial health, access to health, where they need to buy medications, etc. That can help, has to be part of the, not just during a pandemic, but otherwise.
Otherwise as well, yeah. Again, this interview is proceeding very smoothly because the next question that I have for you is also about allocations and budgets, especially with regards to the latest budget that was released. And given the fact that this budget was also released in the midst of the pandemic, do you think the budget is adequately responsive to caste and gender issues? And if not, how does it also further, therefore, exacerbate economic inequalities?
See, the first phase of his he gave out a lot of money. Gave out announced a lot of schemes for the COVID related and all that is good. There is some money allocated. But um, if I look at, I'm just looking at what is the scheme allocation for like women. If you look at the scheme allocation for women in this, there is only out of the total allocation, out of that, there's only some 7,986 crores for allocation of under the centrally allocation, which is only about 0.89% of the total budget, 0.89%. So you can see where their priorities. That's for Dalit women, and for Adivasi women, it's about 0.34%. So you can see where this allocation, where their priorities are lying. So it's very less allocation. In terms of, if you can just give me 1 minute,
Sure.
let me just 1 second. I'll just open one of my, so just to give you a specific to, and we even the schemes that were, announced, we did a massive campaign to ensure that people are able to access those schemes. Many of them, there was no awareness that was there. Many of them did know these schemes were there. Many of them were not able to access those schemes. I wish I have the presentation. I don't know. So I think there was, I can give you some data. Sorry, I'm not able to find my presentation.
No, that's completely
so
fine.
There also, like the Jan Dhan, was mostly for in women's accounts, they'll put money. Many of them were not aware of this, of the schemes. Actually, Yash, what I will do is I can send you the presentation, and if you can also include some of the slides, I don't know if it's possible. If it is, then please do, or you can put it up, in
part of the recorded
just show,
interview.
Yeah. If you can show in between 1 or 2 slides, I'll send you that. You can do that, just so people can understand what I'm talking about. I don't remember it off the top of my head. So I think there were no awareness campaigns. There was no efforts to ensure that these schemes were able to reach the ground. So there are a few things here. One is that they're not allocating proportionate budgets. So in that also, there is a huge gotala, I feel. That's what you would say. So say, for example, the due allocation this year was 1,39,172 crores. They've given only 83,000. But even out of this 83,000 crores for Dalits and 53,653 for Adivasis, if you look at the targeted schemes, we do this analysis based on the fact that how much of this money is allocated to what scheme and whether that scheme is benefiting. For example, if 1,000 crores are allocated to building a road randomly, a highway, that is not direct benefit, to the community. It has to be direct benefit. So targeted schemes, we've calculated 16,174. So out of this 83,000 crores for Dalits, 83,257, 174 crores will actually go. Can you hear me?
Your connection is a bit flaky. Yes.
Can you hear me now? Is it okay? I don't know what happens.
Yeah, this is a bit better. Also, the internet might be a bit shaky on my end too. Yeah, but this is a bit better, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you? Yeah. Now you can hear me clearly.
Yeah. This is better. I'm just looking at the connection strength on the Zoom screen. Yeah, this should be better. Yeah.
So So out of 83,257 crores, only 16,000 crore will actually go to the community. The rest of the 67,000 crores is going for what? It's going for salaries to be paid, random things like making roads, electricity, powerhouse. I mean, that has absolutely nothing to do with the Dalits. So somewhere they're also not following the clear guidelines which says that it has to be directly beneficially to the community, to the individual, or to the family. So they're already flouting those guidelines. So, like this, if you keep on unpacking, you'll realize that just having a budget and just having the sub plans is not what we're looking for. We are also looking for innovative schemes. We're also looking for to ensure that the budget actually reaches the ground, that actually people have access to these schemes. Take, for example, scholarships. This year scholarship, they say that till about January, I think, one second, here it is. The allocation this year is about 2,927 in 1920, and this year it is about 3,347. It has no, sorry, it's reduced. It was 3,347 crores in 1718, and then it decreased to 2,987 in 2021. So it has actually decreased, although they are saying that they're giving a high amount, but it's actually decreased. Similarly for the post-metric for Adivasis as well. Also, if you look at the expenditure in the last 1 year, up to January, they hadn't spent, they're not spent not even 40%, or also they're about 30, 40. So in 2 months, 3 months, they're supposed to spend 60%. So also, we know that a lot of problems with scholarships is what that students are not getting timely disbursals. People are getting scholarships 3 years after they complete their education. So somewhere we are pushing for a timely release of these funds to remove the bottlenecks that are there and to increase the allocation, because it has to be, the scholarships have to be, all the students, all the eligible students have to receive these scholarships is our demand. And that will continue to be our demand. So I think there has to be, great that you're allocating, but there also has to be an efficient system that follows the implementation of these budgets that are allocated and the schemes that are announced. I think that is very important. And for that, we need really strong monitoring on the ground level, from the ground to the, from the district or even below district, sub-district to the national level.
Okay. Again, very insightful. Thank you, Beena, for that. And you mentioned scholarships again, and the last couple of questions focus, one, on the curriculum changes, and two, campaigning and building movements in general. So coming to the question about curriculum changes, given the campaigns and the trainings and the workshops and the seminars and the advocacy in general of different forms that you have led and been a part of, how do you feel about bringing in curriculum change at high school? And how would we figure out the modalities of achieving the same?
Yeah, so I think curriculum change has a totally different advocacy strategy, not what we do at NCTHR. We're not focusing on that. But because you're asking me, I would think that yes, I think some of these things need to be earlier on. Recently we had a discussion whether they should be more on, learning about Ambedkar, learning about Phule, at the younger, levels. And my response was yes, as early as possible, we should, instill this, a subject on this, if possible, on social reformers, because it is so important that we are here, we have free speech, women are able to have our rights, we have 8 hours of working, is all because of Babasaheb Ambedkar, no? So unless we taught that, I never knew that as a child growing up. The only thing I knew was he drafted the constitution. Probably there was 1 line or 2 lines about it. So somewhere similarly, Again, my internet says it's unstable.
It is a bit patchy, but I can hear you. We can hear you.
Similarly, I feel that, yeah. Similarly, if there is a curriculum change, and if we're looking at having some of these, we've also been talking to some colleges and universities to have this as part of their curriculum, to have governance issues, budget issues, talking on more in terms of realistic, not just the macroeconomic, but how the rest of the economics. What is it? What are these plans? How do we ensure that we have inclusive budgetary allocation? All these. We've also been, talking with different colleges and universities to have this as a curriculum, part of curriculum. And I think it's important. But the advocacy that we do is different from what we're doing. I think this has to go through the NCERT, I think, and the National Education Council Board, whatever. So I think the strategy has to be totally different. But if my response to the question that yes, we have to have a change. I think we are following curriculums that probably my grandfather also studied the same thing, and I maybe also studied the same thing. I don't think there's so much change. So somewhere we need to bring, subjects that are much more real, and a much more critical and significant to the work that we're doing. Yes, so definitely my response.
Okay.
What was your second question after that?
The second question was more an organizational strategy again, building upon your campaigning work. And given that we are a collective as well, what are the changes that can be incorporated into similar collectives' work style and functioning in order to participate in the campaign against discrimination? And what should we specifically focus on?
Yeah. So my response is that we need more people. The more people we have, the more we can. So I would like to also take this opportunity to congratulate all of you to forming this collective. I think that is really great. I think that's also I was quite impressed. I just read about this and quite impressed to know that young people are thinking beyond, are thinking of innovative strategies. So I think it's really important. Your collective itself is really powerful. Get more people to talk about this. Get more people to enter this field. There are many people. There are many younger people now who are interested in this. I keep getting mails. Ours is not a very big organization that I can take 100 people. So I feel bad. But then I think more and more of these collectives is really important. What the collective can do to engage in this thing, you're already doing it in a way. I feel that talking about this, getting more people to talk about this, ensuring that what is inclusive, what is inclusivity in these spaces. Let's remember that these spaces were dominated by mostly the dominant caste and a few men, even if it Dalit men, there are few, even they have not been able to, maybe get these spaces fully. So somewhere this was really a male dominated bastion, even within the dominant. And the women, the feminists who are part of these discourses are also dominant caste women who don't want to give up their spaces. They want to continue to hold on to that privilege. So we have to break into those spaces. We have to, engage if possible. We have to challenge. But not totally. I think we cannot totally cancel out the work that they have also done, but also challenge them to ensure that our representation is there. Whether it be unashamedly, I would say that we have to challenge. What else can you do? Get more younger people, help them believe that this is a field that they can take up, give confidence. We have a campaign on higher education, access to higher education, and we are getting as many young people in about 10 states to ensure that they fill up application forms. If they don't have ID cards, if they don't have, and we have these 6 levels of engagement that we do in different states, from from the district officer to the university registrar to treasury where the money is being, to the national level. So and engagement at these different levels, but encourage, because you're a much younger collective, you can do so much more with the younger people. Start social media campaigns on this subject, so that more and more people are aware of it, that more and more people are encouraged to get into this. So I think these are some things that we can always collaborate on many things. I'm very happy to support you in whatever way that I can, and the organization as well. But all the best to whatever you're doing. Continue to do the great work. I'm sure that you will fly more than what many of us have done, because there is a social media spaces now. There's so much of other engagement. Younger students are pushing and breaking the barriers. So I think it's great to see. So yes, there is a lot of collaborative efforts that we can do, not just NCDHR. There are other Dalit organizations. There are other organizations that you can link up with. And I think it will be great. Yeah. And also academics. Let's not forget.
Yes.
Always academics forget.
Thank you again, Veena. And just one, I think, clarification. So Aditi's organization, that's called Bahujan Economists. And although we do partner with them,
It's part of this, no?
we're not part of the same collective. So we represent the
Okay,
Rethinking
okay.
Economics India network. So
Okay,
our focus
okay.
has been a bit towards changing the discipline of economics. But Aditi is a close friend, and we've
Part of
also
the boat.
part of the Bahujan Economists, and we've partnered with them on a couple of occasions as well. Yes.
Great.
Okay, so
Great.
lastly, before we close the recording bit, is there anything that you would like to? I think this has already been covered, but I'm still going to ask you this. Is there anything that you would like to suggest to students and freshers as they begin their, I guess, career in an academic path, and who hope also to contribute to this movement? Is there any piece of advice or suggestions that you can give them, that you would like to give them?
Yeah, I think that as younger people who might be struggling to get access to spaces, get access to education, my advice should be, don't think about the movement and contributing at this point. What is important is to ensure that you get your due, that you are able to stand up. Once you're able to stand up, once you're able to educate yourself, then you think of how you can contribute. So I think the first step should be ensuring that you're able to get access to higher education, where you want to go, what you want. Once you're clear about that, I think it's you're done. Then you can contribute so much more. The other thing I'd like to say, that please encourage people who are interested in economics to take up economics. I think we need more people from the community to be part of this space. Because we have very few people who are taking up. Don't be intimidated, don't at all be intimidated. I think it's really important to ensure that we encourage more younger people to take up economics, to take up statistics, to ensure that you're able to get be part of this. I think many people want to be in academics, but this is also one really good field that they can take up. Thirdly, in terms of as a member of the community and a younger people, I think the fact that they're able to come to these institutions of learning, of higher education, in itself is a contribution to the community, because they're not only, many of us, we always say that we're not only learning for ourselves, but there's a whole community behind us who are waiting to watch us, seeing us grow, helping us get these opportunities, and are able to come forward. So I think continue to have the passion, find out what you want, and don't get discouraged. Reach out. There are many of us in this field. We can definitely support in whatever way that we can.
Okay, thank you so much, Veena. It's been a deep pleasure. Well, one last thing I'm going to do before we close the recording is that I'm going to tell everyone to follow our YouTube channel and our other social media pages, and also to keep track of your work as well, because your work it's much needed, it's magnificent, and yeah, all we can do is honestly thank you for your contribution so far. Yes. Thank you. Thank you again, Beena.
Thank you so much. Yes.